Yes, so now I'll welcome our student speakers. Unfortunately, one of our student speakers, Kav Lakshmi, was sick and won't be speaking today. And as we continue with the student panel, just a reminder that we will be sharing this video widely with our sister agencies and communities members. So it's awesome to have everyone's continued and utmost attention. And now I'll introduce our first speaker, Shrisha Gulial. So I will give a brief bio and let her begin. So Shrisha is a sophomore at Valley Christian High School in San Jose, and she is a member of her school's South Asian Club and Mock Trial Club, and also assists in coaching Kung Fu and has been pursuing dance as a passion. So now everyone, please give a hand for Shrisha.
I would like to applaud Maitri for hosting its youth convention to commemorate teenage dating gun violence, and it is my privilege to speak on the concerns and consequences of teenage dating gun violence. There has been an alarming rise of teens reporting dating violence. Teenage dating violence is a subset of intimate partner violence, which refers to the abusive and aggressive behavior, verbal, physical, sexual, emotional, economic, and psychological in dating relationships among teens to frighten, manipulate, humiliate, blame, and injure the partner to gain domination or control. Irrespective of gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, or sexual orientation, dating abuse and violence is disturbingly common among adolescents and young adults aged between 10 to 18. As we know, gun violence is a uniquely lethal problem in the United States, and the teenage dating relationship has not been affected by it. Usual perception is that teen dating violence is less serious than violence among adult partners, as dating teens are probably not living together. However, it is a disturbing fact that gun violence occurs among dating teens too. Although a person under 18 is not allowed to purchase or own firearms, their parents can. Availability and accessibility of firearms can escalate violence to lethal levels even among teens. A new study published by JAMA Pediatrics confirms the occurrence of dating homicide among teens, in which 90% victims are girls, and most common used weapon was a gun. The researchers examined 2,188 homicides of young people 11 to 18 years old, in which the victim knew the perpetrator. Of these homicides, 150, 6.9%, were classified as intimate partner homicides. The findings showed that majority of the homicides occur in older adolescents between the ages of 16 and 18. A common trigger is ending the relationship and the jealousy of a victim finding someone new. In some cases, there might be conflict, betrayal, or severe altercation or argument that ends in death by firearm. There are serious consequences of gun violence. It is important to know that the access of gun is the key component in gun violence incidents. Presence of firearm raises risk of accidental or intentional injury and death, including suicide. Even if initially guns or firearms are there to just threaten or intimidate, too often it ends tragically in homicide. The pernicious impacts of lives lost in gun violence are felt by the immediate family, community, and society at large. The intensity of pain and anguish that families of deceased victims endure throughout their lives cannot be expressed. The repercussions of gun violence exposure and trauma it creates persist lifelong and over generations. Presence of guns puts the safety of vulnerable partners at risk and entails fear and panic, which damages self-confidence in the victim. It renders the vulnerable partner powerless, helpless, and anxious, which in turn negatively impacts their physical and mental well-being. It also influences many aspects of functioning, like low performance in school, job, or any activity. Scholars have noted depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, self-injurious behavior, substance abuse, multiple levels of fear, trust issues as a result of victimization among gun violence abuse among survivors. Researchers also show significant links between suicidal ideation, completed suicides, and adolescent dating violence. It is important to realize that teen dating gun violence is a serious problem impacting millions of youth globally. In school and community settings, it is crucial to build teen awareness about healthy communication skills in relationships, consent, safer sex, and to identify red flags. There is dearth of research on the way gun interacts in teen dating violence, so research on the risk factors is much needed to create comprehensive prevention and intervention programs. Restrictions on purchase and possession of firearms needs to strengthen. The current federal law does not prohibit abusing dating partners from possessing guns. This exclusion of abusive dating partners from firearms restriction is deadly. Many organizations have been calling on lawmakers to close the boyfriend loophole, which will prevent domestic abusers from accessing guns. In the end, I hope that concerted efforts at home, school, community, state, and federal level are made for advocacy, informed research, and stringent laws to curb gun violence.
All right, thank you so much, Trisha, for your speech. Everyone, please give one more round of applause. Alrighty, and now I'll introduce our next student speaker, Rahul Ray. So Rahul is a sophomore attending Piedmont Hills High School in San Jose. He is the school's debate club vice president, Model UN's publicist, and a coach for HIGS Quiz Bowl, and a first-degree black belt in martial arts. Rahul volunteers for Maitri's prevention program. So now, let's welcome Rahul.
Good afternoon. My name is Rahul Ray, and today I'll be talking about a wide range of topics, but mainly it's about misconceptions and causes, and to some degree, the prevention of gun violence. Before I start, I'd like to thank Maitri for giving me the opportunity to speak here today, as well as other youth members and community members, because it's really important for us to voice our opinions on a wide platform like this. Before I start, can I ask, do we have any NRA members in the house? No? Okay, because I think that it's really important to hear other perspectives, and all of us have to work together to voice our opinions so we can come together and forge a solution we can all agree on. No? With so many different viewpoints and perspectives like the gun crisis. So misconceptions. Let's talk about a really big one that's personal to me. It's the misconception that media can directly incite gun violence. You've heard it before. Video games are causing violence in our communities. It's only partially true. Take it from a survivor of Columbine, who, when he was asked about the circumstances, said that he believed that video games may have been a factor, but in no way were a direct cause of the shooting. Because with Columbine and so many other shootings, you have more severe underlying causes like bullying, you have mental health, abuse, substance abuse, radicalization, and so many other issues that are to blame, and video games are just an external factor that can only amplify those real concerns. Video games can only really incite violence in two cases. One, where the consumer is not very mentally stable, or two, if it's a child, because children are very young and impressionable and can be easily influenced by media. And that really comes down to parenting responsibility. Parents have to be responsible for what their children consume. Otherwise, they're not really accountable for parenting. They're not doing their job. And it comes down to parents taking responsibility for their children. The other misconception I want to talk about is that we need to take away everyone's guns. I'm not saying that, because there are a lot of legitimate reasons to legally own a firearm. Shooting is a sport. It can also be used for hunting, and I think most importantly, self-defense. There are legitimate reasons to own a firearm. A lot of home invasions have been stopped because someone owned a handgun. In Texas a couple of years ago, a mass shooting was averted in a mall because someone responsibly owned a firearm and was able to stop the crime. So there are reasons. And don't just take it from me. Look at Iceland. Iceland's a country with a lot of guns per capita, comparable to the US for its size, but has such little gun crime because regulation in that country is so well enforced. And I'll talk about regulation in a bit, but let's talk about some real causes. Number one, of course, is mental health. The WHO cites it as the leading cause of youth violence globally, and that includes gun violence in America. Mental health is connected to things like abuse, bullying, and substance abuse, and all of those are factors that need to be destigmatized and looked at, especially among youth, because they're very prone to violence in those circumstances. Another really important cause of gun violence is PTSD. I'm lumping that differently from just general mental health because it disproportionately affects a lot of people in the veteran community. Combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder has affected a lot of people, and they've clearly shown these symptoms. They should be diagnosed, but because of how lax gun laws are nationally, they're allowed to own firearms, which makes them a danger to themselves and others. The most famous example is in 2013, a Marine veteran who very clearly was displaying signs of emotional and psychological distress was allowed to own a handgun. And because of that ownership of a firearm, which he shouldn't have had, he was able to shoot former Navy SEAL Chris Kyle and his friend during an intervention. And that really leads into my point about regulation. Who should have firearms and what firearms should they have? Just nationally speaking, I really think we need universal background checks because laws in this country are so loose that people who have restraining orders against them, people who have criminal records, diagnosed psychological conditions, there's so many workarounds for them to allow them to purchase firearms that makes them dangerous to themselves and others in their communities. Just taking the general point of this convention into partner violence, people who have restraining orders filed against them are still, in some states, able to purchase firearms. There's so many loopholes and so much wiggle room in the legislation that they can purchase firearms and end up engaging in domestic violence with that firearm. It's scary to think about, but it happens. There's such little regulation with who can purchase firearms that it makes them dangerous to themselves and others in their communities and relationships. And the other point I'll talk about is what should be legal, because right to bear arms is a very vague term, and I think we need to draw a line of what defines a constitutionally ownable arm, because I think assault weapons is where the line has to be drawn. Because I'm opening the floor here. Can anyone give me a legitimate reason to own an assault weapon, like an AR-15? Anyone? That's what I thought, because there isn't one. It's not a hunting rifle, it's not a sport rifle, even for home defense. Just here, I'm quoting my history teacher, who is a former Marine. He told me that for defending your home, you would never use an assault rifle. You'd use a handgun. And again, assault rifles, there's no legitimate reason. People own assault weapons because they want to own assault weapons. There's no legal application. The same thing goes for things like high-capacity magazines or bump stocks or ghost guns. These things shouldn't be legal, but because of how loose our legislation is and how vague the Constitution is, people can own them, and they end up being used in crimes like the 2017 Las Vegas shooting, where bump stocks were employed. Again, I think that assault weapons should be criminalized because those things have no real civilian application and unfortunately end up being used disproportionately in mass shootings and other forms of crime. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Hajra and I'm a volunteer at Maitri. I've been with them for about a year now and I will be getting our open mic segment started. And then afterwards, I'll pass it on to the rest of our open mic speakers. So, coming from a psychology background, I often tend to look at many social issues from a mental health perspective, and I know some of our speakers touched on this perspective as well. So through my education and work with Maitri, I've learned that all forms of violence can have profound negative impacts on individuals that witness or experience it. And the reverberating effect of gun violence is the development of psychological disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and substance abuse, among many more. This exposure and these mental mental health disorders can be particularly impactful on young people who are still developing, both cognitively and emotionally. The rise of gun violence in the context of horrific school shootings and in domestic settings has given way to ample research showing us the consequences of exposure to violence on the mental health of adolescents. Unfortunately, I can recall personal experiences with gun violence in my own life and in the lives of my friends and family that affirmed my belief that guns have no place in our schools, communities, homes, and definitely not in our relationships as a tool of fear and harm. I remember taking my younger sister to funerals of her high school classmates whose lives were taken by gun violence. And I also remember the lasting impact it had on her, even though she did not witness the tragedy. It reminds me how far a reach violence has on those it touches. On a more hopeful note, the research has also shed light on various methods for healing on an individual level, on a community level, and on a larger level that involves our policymakers who can help us keep guns out of these environments that should be safe and nurturing. I urge you all to think about the instances of gun violence in the world around you and consider the many ways in which one senseless act caused adverse effects that continue to plague victims for years after. We as the youth of our society should focus our efforts on systemic change and building healthy relationships with each other by implementing trust, respect, and kindness in our actions. Dating relationships at a young age can expose us to violence, but speaking out against gun violence and accessing resources when we need help are a few ways for us to help end the cycle of violence. I'll now pass the mic over. I'd like to ask all our open mic speakers to please start by sharing your name and your school. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Navanitha Rane and I'm a junior at Evergreen Valley High School. The topic that I wanted to focus on today was something that was elaborated on by our keynote speakers, and that's the impact on gun violence on women and especially women of color in relation to domestic violence as well. So as mentioned before, women are disproportionately affected by gun violence when it's paired with domestic violence. And studies have shown that when firearms are present in situations of domestic violence, the risk of homicide for women increases dramatically. In fact, domestic violence incidents involving firearms are far more likely to result in the death of people compared to those involving other weapons or no weapons at all. Moreover, women of color, especially those coming from underfunded communities, face disproportionate levels of gun violence due to systemic oppression and lack of domestic violence resources. In fact, according to Giffords Law Center themselves, Black women make up 61% of gun-related homicides among women in total and are 5 times more likely to be killed compared to white counterparts. So what can we do to tackle these systemic issues? It all starts in our own communities with education and broadening communities' access to gun violence prevention resources and events like these. The impact on gun violence on women and especially women of color is especially profound, but by coming together and empowering these systemically oppressed neighborhoods, we can make America a little bit safer for everyone. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Sabrina Moore and I'm a current high school senior at Monte Vista in Cupertino, and I also volunteer with Students Demand Action. In 4th grade, minutes before the active shooter drill took place in my elementary school, I vividly remember my teacher speaking to the class about its significance, describing what was at stake if this were to be a real live situation. I remember envisioning myself doing all the things she told us, hiding quietly, running in a zigzag but non-consistent pattern as far as I could go, and always being aware of the nearest exit. Since then, I have never failed to notice all exits as soon as I enter a building. Now, I'll be the first to say that I have matured from my 4th grade self. However, as much as I have grown, The fear of a potential active shooter situation has unfortunately grown alongside me. From the time I was in elementary school to the time I started high school, the national gun violence rate doubled. Within 4 years, the chances of me and my peers dying to gun violence doubled. Through a study conducted by Georgia Tech on the long-term impacts of active shooter drills on students, teachers, and parents, they found that overall stress and anxiety increased by 42% and concerns over death increased by 22%, all within 90 days after the drill. Likewise, between 2015 and 2022, nearly 2 in 3 child victims of mass shootings died in incidents connected to domestic violence. As a student, sister, and aunt, the thought of allowing my younger brother, younger nieces, younger nephews, and future generations to enter a world and school system where their first priority is not learning while building strong connections, but the thought of having to self-persevere themselves in the event of a situation involving firearms appalls me. And if you're here today, I'm sure you share the same sentiment. This being said, we must change the narrative of sending only thoughts and prayers, since quite frankly, they are no longer enough. It is imperative that we take action now. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Margaret Francor. I'm a senior at Monte Vista High School, and along with Sabrina, I volunteer with Students in Action. I hear recurrent conversation around my campus and in my community. I often hear people my age expressing their concern about an unjust subject, but then admitting that they feel there's nothing they can do about it. And I used to be somebody who held this mindset. Gun violence was always a problem I felt extremely strongly about, but felt incredibly paralyzed by the extent of the issue, and often thought to myself, what can a teenager do about such a large crisis? Now, almost 2 years into my advocacy with Students in Action, one of the most important things I have learned is that my age does not invalidate my effort, advocacy, and voice, but rather it is the youth voices that have a unique power to catalyze progress within our communities. As Students in Action, we have been inspired to take many important steps towards creating a safer place, whether it was conversing with politicians at the state capitol, where we were advocating for priority bills, one of which was AB 28 that Ms. Weber mentioned earlier, to organizing events at our school and community. Every action, no matter how small, makes an incredible difference. There's a common misconception that every action has to be huge or complicated, but I quickly learned what wonderful support systems we have in place to help guide us through our process. The message I want to convey today is that advocacy is extremely accessible. Passion resides within us for a reason, to make a difference and to push us to make our voices heard. I encourage you to reach out to your school's newspaper or write a statement for your morning announcements to educate other students on this pressing issue. You can start a group or get involved in groups that already exist and inform your communities about this issue. Action comes in many different shapes and sizes, but each one is an enormous step toward creating a world where we can feel safe and free of gun violence. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Olivia Rodriguez from Piedmont Hills High School, and I wrote a poem called Petals about the issue of domestic abuse and its intersection with gun violence, like we've been talking about all afternoon. It's so easy to get a guy who loves to have fun. Most abuse is private, it is legal. In the dream house, call it feudal. The past, the future, my mind's most painful removal. Because right now is my most personal hell, therewithal. So easy to get a way to keep the wound numb. Stuff it with flowers, fill me with false holistics and gentle probiotic prescriptions. Let me listen to your contradictions till I am nothing but petals and stitches. It's so easy to get a place to run, but not a way out. I keep every doubt. I have been manipulated, sometimes I've contemplated other escapes, but all of them end in death or rapes. My family has been threatened, so even on my deathbed, no, my future is not protected. This projection of your emotion, the superior infection that controls your hand, your mouth, till I am buried under the undergrowth. It is no mistake. The men they fall, they break, disallowed from repair shops, the oil changed by the cops. They are more likely to get caught, except the times when they're not. Abuse of disabled and BIPOC are less reported when these violences are already hardly recorded. LGBTQ plus domestic abuse made silent, perfect partnerships expected, and the rest are disregarded. It's so easy to escape, find another man, his superhero flying cape. How will I know he won't do the same? How will I know it won't be so easy for him to get a 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men? Violence at the hands of the too quickly forgiven, of the trust is intimate, of every piece is given. Half of women killed are killed by a partner, half of those were shot at. God, I wish it was harder. It could be your daughter, your son, your loved one, you and me. So set the youth free and make it just a little bit harder to get a gun.
Hi, my name is Anya. I attend Notre Dame San Jose High School. The threat of guns and their misuse has consumed our lives. I can say that from experience. When I turn on the radio in the morning or listen to the news channel, as I'm sure many of us do as well, I hear countless stories about deaths from school shooters across our nation. In schools, in peace protests, in parks, everywhere. When I go to my own school, I'm constantly reciting the drills that we've practiced and looking for escape routes. When I hear the alarm go off at my school, my immediate thought is that it must be a school shooter. Not a hazard, not a chemical leak, but a school shooter. This has become my new normal, and I'm sure in many ways you can relate to my experiences. We've become so accustomed to the idea of school shooters across our country taking the lives of others, from children to adults, that these newses and protocols don't quite faze us as much as they used to. The acceptance of this as a norm should make us realize that something must change. It's not possible for us to sit idly around and expect this problem to be resolved by itself. I believe that there should be comprehensive and community state-level prevention programs in place to reduce access to guns. We must protect those who seem to risk their lives to get an education every day, who go to work every day, and for whom stepping outside of their house constitutes an act of bravery. We must stop this from becoming the new normal for generations to come and ensure that we are able to live our lives freely and without fear, because these problems, if not addressed now, will play a much bigger role in your life, in the lives of your family, in the lives of your friends, and in the lives of your children than you may think. Now is the time for us to step out and speak out for ourselves and the people around us. Thank you.